WHGE 95.3 FM. Coming up, the Open Eye.
Those of us that indulge in or commit intellectual violence don't do so for the pleasure of mental masturbation or ego diddling. We do so because the chains of oppression on our people's minds are deep and difficult to remove.
Good morning, my children of the sun. Welcome to the Open Eye on WHGE 95.3 FM. I'm your host, Third Eye Optometrist, having trouble with my mic. All right, getting it started here. All right. And as we always tell you, every generation has its purpose. Ours is to reveal the truth and reverse the brainwashing. All right. Hey, Sherry, I see you there, sister. All right. Let's get moving right here. Listen, children of the sun. Welcome to another edition of the Open Eye, where we remove the blindfolds, challenge the comfortable myths, and search relentlessly for the truth. And how many times you heard me say this? Every night I petition the ancestors for guidance, and every morning the ancestors charge me to sound the alarm. That assignment has never changed. Truth has no expiration date, and justice delayed is justice denied. So before we get into today's broadcast, I want to pause and recognize a giant whose shoulders so many of us stand on. Today we honor the incomparable Tony Brown, creator and host of Tony Brown's Journal. Long before podcasts, before YouTube channels, live streams, and social media gave independent voices a platform, Tony Brown was already doing the work. Week after week, decade after decade, he brought serious discussion about black history, economics, politics, education, international affairs, and culture directly into America's living rooms. He is one of those people, and when he came on, you had to be quiet in the house. And he didn't wait for permission. He didn't ask corporate media what subjects were acceptable. He understood that information is power, and that an informed people become a dangerous people to ignorance, to injustice, and to oppression. Tony Brown interviewed presidents, revolutionaries, scholars, entrepreneurs, artists, scientists, and ordinary people doing extraordinary things. He showed us that our stories deserve depth, not sound bites, complexity, not caricatures, truth, not propaganda. If the Open Eye has a mission, it is because pioneers like Tony Brown helped define what responsible black media could be. Brother Tony, we thank you for your life's work. We salute your courage, your scholarship, and your unwavering commitment to our people. Children of the sun, remember this. Control the narrative and you influence a generation. Control the history and you influence a civilization. Control the economics and you influence the future. That's why we discuss history. That's why we discuss politics. That's why we discuss economics, because none of those subjects exist in isolation. Today we'll examine headlines that others want you to skim past. We'll separate evidence from emotion, propaganda from reality, and symbolism from substance. Our mission isn't simply to make you angry. Our mission is to make you aware. Awareness becomes understanding. Understanding becomes organization. Organization becomes power. So settle in. Open your ears, open your minds, and most importantly, keep your eyes open, because this is the open eye. All right. Hey, let me get my disclaimer out the way. All right. All right.
The views and opinions expressed on Open Eye are those of the host, guests, and contributors, and do not reflect the policy or position of WHGE 95.3 FM nor our sponsor, the Delaware Center for Homeless Vets. Any content provided by Open Eye's hosts, guests, or contributors are theirs and are not intended to malign any religion, ethnic group, company, or individual.
All right. Hey, Brother Bourne, I see you. All right, let's see what I got here. What I do with it? Like that, all right. WHGE 95.3 FM coming up. Oh, no, not coming up. On the air is the Open Eye. Okay, I got a couple of PSAs coming up. As you know, what's the date? The 30th? Yeah. In a little over a month, August Courtly is coming up. Right? And it's the August Courtly Festival, the August Courtly Week. Save the date, August 23rd to August the 30th. And of course, you'll have the Youth Explosion, the Big Courtly Gospel Festival, Revival Night, worship services, Liberation Fest, and more. And in support of the August Courtly Festival, the second annual Mother-Daughter Lunch. And that will be Saturday, August the 1st at 11 a.m. It costs $60 a person. And it will be at the Doubletree Hilton Hotel, 4727 Concord Pike, right here in Wilmington, Delaware. And the attire is brunch chic. All right, brunch chic. Guest speaker will be Pastor Bernadette Mills. All right, so show up with your elegance and stylishness intact. All right, moving right along. I got it right here. Give me a second, y'all. Yeah, I'm do it that next. Yeah. Okay, as you know, by now, I'm sure you've heard that President Obama's library is open. Right? They had a big celebration and all. Well, you know, MAGA wants to boycott President Obama's library. So the black delegation has an announcement. We're boycotting tanning salons. That's right. We figure it's only fair because the number of MAGA supporters who read books and visit libraries is roughly the same as the number of black people who use tanning salons. Yeah. MAGA announcing a boycott of President Obama's library is like threatening to stop buying kale. Nobody expected you in the produce aisle to begin with. But since they made their grand declaration, all right, like I said, effective immediately, from the black delegation, we're boycotting tanning salons. Not stepping a foot in them. We're not purchasing a single bronzing lotion, not even glancing at a spray tan coupon in the mall. It's going to be a total, complete shutdown. Why? Because fairness matters. And because the number of MAGA supporters who visit libraries It's zero. The same number of black people that visit tanning salons. So if they're going to boycott something they ain't using anyway, we're going to match their energy, symmetry, balance, reciprocity, the ancient laws of shade. And honestly, this might be the most peaceful cross-cultural exchange in American history. Two groups boldly refusing to participate in activities they were never involved in any goddamn way. Diplomacy first. Yeah, this is the open eye. Hey, Steve, I see you. All right. WHGE 95.3 FM. You've heard me talk about this before, but I want to open with some history here. Most people remember the Negro Leagues as a chapter in baseball history. Okay, they remember the uniforms, the barnstorming games, and the legends. What they don't often remember is that the Negro Leagues were also one of the most successful black-owned economic systems ever created in the United States. And this wasn't just baseball. It was black economics in motion. Look, during the era of segregation, black Americans were systematically locked out of white-owned businesses, hotels, restaurants, banks, and professional sports. So black communities did what they had done since Reconstruction. They built their own institutions. And the Negro Leagues became the heartbeat of that independent economy. By the 1930s and 40s, every time a Negro League team rode into town, it created an economic boom. Black-owned hotels filled every room. Black restaurants stayed packed from breakfast till closing. Barbershops, taxi companies, clothing stores, newspapers, nightclubs, and theaters all benefited from the crowds. Entire neighborhoods planned their calendars around the arrival of the teams. Owners invested in one another's businesses. Money circulated from one black enterprise to another instead of immediately leaving the community. This is what economists call the multiplier effect. $1 earned by a black business became another black family's paycheck, then another business's revenue, then another family's rent or mortgage payment. Yeah, the same dollar strengthened an entire community before it ever left. Thousands of people who never threw a pitch or swung a bat made their living because the Negro Leagues existed. And then there were the players. Heroes like Josh Gibbs, often called the greatest power hitter baseball has ever seen, never received the major league career he deserved because of segregation. Satchel Paige dazzled crowds with a pitching style so dominant that even major league stars admitted he was among the greatest ever to stand on a mound. I contend that he was the greatest pitcher ever. Alongside them were legends like Cool Papa Bell, whose speed became the stuff of legend, and Buck Leonard, one of baseball's finest first basemen. These athletes weren't simply entertainers, they were economic engines. Then came 1947. Jackie Robinson broke Major League Baseball's color barrier. His courage changed American sports forever. And that achievement deserves its place in history. But history is rarely as simple as the stories we tell. What often goes unmentioned is the economic costs that follow. As major league teams began signing the Negro League's biggest stars, they paid nothing to black team owners who had discovered, developed, and showcased that talent. The wealth generated by black baseball increasingly flowed into white-owned franchises. Within roughly a decade, many Negro League teams had folded. Black-owned stadiums lost tenants. Black businesses that depended on game day crowds lost customers. Newspapers lost readers. Vendors lost income. Hotels saw empty rooms. Restaurants lost packed dining rooms. An entire black business ecosystem collapsed. Integration opened doors for individual black athletes. That mattered. But integration did not transfer ownership. Black talent entered white institutions. Black institutions themselves were largely left behind. That distinction is one of the most important and least discussed lessons in American economic history. The question isn't whether Jackie Robinson should have integrated baseball. He absolutely should have had the opportunity to compete anywhere his talent could take him. The real question is why integration so often meant the dismantling of black-owned institutions rather than investment in them. Why wasn't there a strategy to preserve black ownership? Why weren't Negro League owners compensated for losing the stars they had developed? Why wasn't there an effort to merge institutions instead of absorbing one into the other? Those questions still echo today. Every generation of black Americans faces the same challenge. Is success measured only by gaining access to someone else's institutions, or also by building and sustaining institutions we own ourselves? The Negro Leagues remind us that black America has never lacked talent, vision, or entrepreneurial ability. Given the opportunity, even under segregation, black communities built an economy that employed thousands, created wealth, and produced some of the greatest athletes the world has ever seen. The Negro Leagues were not merely a baseball league. They were proof that black ownership, black cooperation, and black enterprise could flourish even under the harshest conditions. Their story is not just about America's pastime. It is about the enduring relationship between economic power, community ownership, and self-determination, and about what can be gained and what can be lost. When integration is pursued without preserving institutions that communities built for themselves. And I don't want to be too hard on our people for when we were given access to larger society. Imagine a kid that's been locked in. He finally get a chance to get out. He go everywhere he can. But let's also remember the importance of our own institutions and what we can build when left to our own devices. This is Open Eye. I'm Patrice Gibbs. WHGE 95.3 FM. This is the Open Eye. It's something people often underestimate the power of ideals. Because ideals don't make noise when they are born. They begin quietly, on the pages of a book, in a conversation in a classroom, on a street corner, or over a microphone. But history has repeatedly shown that the most powerful force in the world is not an army, it's an awakened mind. In 1901, Booker T. Washington published Up From Slavery. It was the story of a man born into bondage who fought his way through determination, education, and institution building. Whether one agrees with every aspect of Washington's philosophy is beside the point. The book entered the world and began changing lives in ways its author could never have even imagined. Among those whose imagination it captured was Marcus Garvey. As a young man in Jamaica, Garvey read Up From Slavery, and he credited it as one of the works that inspired his thinking about black self-determination, economic independence, and global black unity. From those influences grew the largest mass movement of African people in modern history to this day. Through the Universal Negro Improvement Association, Garvey taught millions that people of African descent should define themselves, build their own institutions, and take pride in their heritage. One of those who absorbed Garvey's message was Kwame Nkrumah. Who's that? Let me tell you, while he was studying and organizing abroad, including time in the United States, in Harlem, Nkrumah immersed himself in Garvey's writings and Pan-African thought. He returned to the Gold Coast carrying not just books, but a vision. In 1957, under his leadership, the Gold Coast became Ghana, the first sub-Saharan African colony to gain independence from British colonial rule in the post-war era. Ghana's independence became a catalyst that energized liberation movements across Africa. Think about that chain of events. One man wrote a book, another man read it and built a movement. A third man read that movement and helped free a nation. Damn. And the liberation of one nation inspired dozens more. That is a ripple effect of knowledge. Too many people believe they have nothing to contribute because they didn't command armies, hold elected office, or possess their vast wealth. History says otherwise. Sometimes the greatest revolutionary act is to write a paragraph, teach a lesson, mentor a child, recommend a book, or tell the truth when everybody else was silent. Excuse me. You have no idea who might be listening. You have no idea who's reading. You have no idea what seed you might be planting. The young person you encourage today may become tomorrow's scientist, teacher, organizer, artist, inventor, or leader. The article you write today may inspire someone on another continent decades from now. The conversation you have this afternoon may alter the course of a family for generations. That's why we must never stop teaching. Knowledge is the one resource that multiplies when it's shared. It does not diminish, it grows. Every mind it touches becomes capable of creating something new, passing something forward, and inspiring someone else. Okay? This is not a weak quote. Each one teach one. Never, never underestimate the influence of your words. History is often nothing more than the story of an ideal passing from one awakened mind to another. until the world itself begins to change. So keep reading, keep writing, keep teaching, keep speaking truth, because somewhere, someone you never met is waiting for the knowledge that only you can pass on. And keep listening to the open eye of Patrice Gibbs. WHGE 95.3 FM, the advocacy education station. You know, some people don't want no education. Let me tell you about something that's going on right here in this white nationalist, evangelical, white trash horror show that we're calling the American society right now. Yeah, I find it interesting that the Abrahamic religions emerged in a world radically different from our own. They were born among ancient pastoral societies whose understanding of the universe was limited by the knowledge available thousands of years ago. People explain lightning as divine anger, disease as punishment, and they're still doing that crap, from unseen spirits. Drought as the will of heaven, and the movements of the sun and stars through mythology, because they lack the scientific tools to investigate the natural world. In short, your Abrahamic religions were founded by goat-herding tent dwellers who didn't know where the sun went at night. And that historical reality should matter when deciding what belongs in a modern public school curriculum. Today we have astronomy instead of astrology. We have evolutionary biology instead of creation myths. We have geology instead of flood legends. We have medicine instead of faith healing. Humanity did not abandon ignorance by accident. We did it by questioning old assumptions, demanding evidence, and refusing to accept because God said so as the end of the conversation. That is the foundation of education. When politicians attempt to require Bible instruction in public schools, they are not advancing education. They are advancing theology. Those are two entirely different missions. The testimony before the Texas State Board of Education cuts to the heart of the issue. Public schools exist to teach students how to think, not what to believe. Science, mathematics, history, and critical thinking are built upon evidence, observation, testing, revision, and the willingness to admit error. Religious doctrine begins with conclusions that followers are expected to accept on faith. Those approaches are fundamentally incomparable. Supporters of mandatory Bible reading often insist that America is a Christian nation and that biblical values are essential to morality. History tells a different story. For Black Americans, the Bible has often been used as an instrument of liberation, not as an instrument of liberation, but as a weapon of domination. Slaveholders quoted scripture to justify human bondage. Passages commanding servants to obey their masters were preached from southern pulpits every Sunday. Enslaved Africans are often forbidden from reading the Bible independently, all right? Because owners feared they would discover the stories of liberation found in Exodus. Instead, carefully selected verses emphasizing obedience and submission were taught to reinforce slavery. After emancipation, the same religious arguments were used to defend segregation, oppose interracial marriage, resist schools integration, and deny Black Americans equal citizenship. The Bible was carried by many of the same people who stood in the schoolhouse doors blocking Black children from entering. It was quoted by politicians defending Jim Crow. It was cited by ministers opposing the civil rights movement. That history cannot simply be erased because it is uncomfortable. Many Black Texans celebrating mandatory Bible instruction appear to overlook this painful legacy. The very book that was once used to justify our ancestors' enslavement is now being presented as something the government should encourage every child to embrace. That should concern every citizen. Not because the Bible exists, but because government has no business deciding which religious tradition deserves official preference. Parents are free to teach Christianity. Churches are free to preach Christianity. Private schools are free to center their curriculum around Christianity. That's religious liberty. But public schools belong equally to Christians, Muslims, Jews, Hindus, agnostics, atheists, and everyone else. Government neutrality is what protects everyone's freedom of conscience. Real education invites questions. Dogma discourages them. Real education changes when new evidence appears. Dogma declares itself infallible. Real education teaches students to evaluate claims regardless of who makes them. Dogma asks students to accept authority without sufficient evidence. The purpose of school is not to manufacture believers, it's to produce informed, thoughtful citizens capable of navigating an increasingly complex world. Children should learn comparative religion as history and culture. They should understand how religions have influenced civilizations, art, politics, literature, and human conflict. But they should never be required to accept one religion as privileged by the state. The greatest discoveries in human history did not come from people who stopped asking questions. They came from people who refused to stop asking. That is the spirit of public education, and that is the spirit public education should protect, not indoctrination, inquiry. Open your eye. I'm Patrice Gibbs. WHGE 95.3 FM, the Open Eye. Let's talk about organized crime. Let's talk about American capitalism. Same thing, ain't it? Okay, let's not talk about the myth of the brochure. Let's deal with the reality. Because what we're living under isn't some grand engine of opportunity. It's a highly organized system of extraction to legalize hustle. a patriotic form of looting dressed up in red, white, and blue. And the targets aren't just people in the global south, whose resources are stripped and whose governments are destabilized. No, the targets are right here at home too. The American working class. Think about this. Roughly 180 million people in this country wake up every day and go to work because they have no choice. Not because they're building wealth, not because they're climbing ladders, but because if they stop moving even for a moment, they fall straight through the cracks. And here's the indictment. More than half of those workers live in or near poverty. Not because they're lazy, not because they're irresponsible, but because the richest nation in modern history has built an economy where wages are engineered to keep people struggling. That's not a bug. This is the business model. And let me wind the lens right now. The World Cup features 48 countries, 48 nations with different histories, culture, and political systems. And out of all 48, the United States is the only one that does not guarantee universal health care. The only one. That means the wealthiest empire on earth, only about 56% of working people can afford to see a doctor when they or their kids get sick. Everyone else is rolling the dice with their health. Imagine that. A country that sends drones across oceans can't guarantee a doctor's visit across town. So what do you get? You get a society splitting in two. A nation where the top lives off assets and the bottom lives off debt. A nation where one class is protected by the system and the other class is preyed upon by the same system. A nation where the people who make everything run, the nurses, the drivers, the teachers, the warehouse workers, the cooks, are treated as disposable. And when a society reaches that point, people start looking for alternatives, not fantasies, not slogans, realism. A realism that says if the system is failing the majority, then the majority has the right and the responsibility to institute something different. Because let's be clear, a society cannot survive when its economic engine is built on the suffering of its own workers. A democracy cannot function when half its population is one medical bill away from disaster. And a nation cannot call itself great when it is the only advanced country on earth that treats healthcare like a luxury item. People feel the ground shifting. They feel the promises breaking. They feel the center collapsing, and they're searching urgently for a model of society that isn't built on exploitation, precarity, and fear. That search is not radical. It's not extreme. That search is reality. Because the real extremism is pretending this system can keep going the way it is. Yeah, this is commentary for people who refuse to be fooled by the slogans. And that brings me to this. Centrist Democrats keep trying to convince America that their brand is still alive. Let's stop lying. It's not alive. It's not struggling. It's not in transition. It is politically deceased, embalmed, and wheeled out every election cycle like a relic nobody even asked for. Because centrist has never meant balance. It's meant fear. Fear of ambition, fear of justice, fear of upsetting donors. Fear of doing anything that might actually help the people who put them in office. Centrist means conservative light. Centrist means capitulation wrapped in a press release. Centrist means we'd love to help, but our corporate sponsors said no. See, centrist means performing empathy while legislating apathy. And while the centrists are busy hosting bipartisan brunches and writing think tank poetry about finding common ground, look at what Zoran Mondami just did in 7 days. He banned ICE. He banned ICE's paramilitary presence from all city property. Not having that crap. He went 8 for 8. And this the one that really scared establishment corporate Democrats. 8 for 8 in his endorsements. Every candidate he backed won. And this one right here, he froze rent for 1 million rent stabilized apartments for 2 years. You hear that, Wilmington? You hear that, Carney? Sorry ass. And that's the first time it happened in New York City history. 1 million households, 2 years of relief. No donor consultation, no triangulation. No, we'll form a commission. He ain't with none of that crap. Action. Decisive, unapologetic, people-centered action. He exposed the centric myth in broad daylight. If politicians wanted to help people, they would. They don't need permission. They don't need a poll. They don't need a consultant whispering in their ear. They need courage. Something the center has never shown, not in decades. That's why you move to the center, because you're scared. This is what happens when public servants are funded by the people, not by corporations who treat democracy like a vending machine. Excuse me. And let's talk about history. Talk about the history the centrists keep running from. FDR understood that capitalism without a safety net becomes predatory. He understood that democracy collapses when people are economically strangled. That's why he pushed the Second Bill of Rights. Economic rights is human rights. Housing, health care, education, security, dignity. And you know what? Conservatives still hate him. That's something else. Damn, man died in the 40s. See, but he was so effective because he proved government could work for ordinary people. And they spent 80 years trying to erase that memory. So let's ask the question that detonates the centrist illusion complexity. You want to move to the center? And let me ask you this. Where's the center between FDR's Second Bill of Rights and the draconian authoritarianism of Project 2025? Where is that, Chuck Schumer? Hakeem Jeffries? Cory Booker? Where is the center between that? Stop that crap about we too far to the left. Where is the center between corruption and integrity? Between corporate capture and public purpose? Between doing nothing and doing what justice demands? There is no center. There's only choosing a side. And the public's watching. And we're watching closely. Who chooses the people and who chooses the donors? Who chooses progression and who chooses the crime families? We got an eye on you. WHGE 95.3 FM. This is The Open Eye. I want to thank sisters Karis Marie and Sister Just Nene, two influencers that be bringing the reality and the truth. Listen up. Because if you're paying attention, you're going to echo this. Free Carmelo Anthony. Oh, the fight isn't over. It's just entered a new phase. Carmelo Anthony now has a new appellate team. And it's no ordinary collection of attorneys. Leading the appeal is veteran appellate lawyer Russell Wilson II, joined by an experienced group of civil rights and criminal defense attorneys, including Texas NAACP President Gary Bledsoe and attorneys associated with the Ben Crump law firm. They have announced they will represent Carmelo pro bono, while conducting an independent review of the trial record to determine whether legal errors occurred and to pursue every available avenue of appeal. That's what an appeal is supposed to do. Not retry the facts, not replay the emotions. An appeal exists to answer one question: with justice administered according to the law? Many of us are still with Carmelo Anthony from the beginning, and we stand with him today. We're encouraged to see so many people in our community refusing to abandon this young brother. Every person deserves competent representation and meaningful appellate review, especially when decades of their lives are on the line. Remember, they're getting 35 years. Now, since the trial ended, additional exhibits released by the court, including surveillance video and other evidence shown to the jury, have fueled renewed debate over exactly how the confrontation unfolded. Supporters of Carmelo point out that some of the released footage contradicts great portions of the public statements made after the incident, and raises questions they believe deserves closer scrutiny on appeal. Those claims will ultimately have to be evaluated through the legal process. That's why appeals matter. Justice demands more than a verdict. Justice demands confidence that the verdict was reached fairly. If evidence exists that contradicts testimony, if witnesses make statements that conflict with video evidence, if constitutional errors occur during jury selection, evidentiary rulings, or trial procedure, then those issues deserve to be examined thoroughly. Not because anyone is above the law, but because everyone is entitled to equal protection under the law. Whether you white nationalist bastards like that or not. And I heard people say, someone putting their hands on you doesn't justify deadly force. Not unless they're trying to kill you. The law of self-defense is more complicated than slogans posted on social media. Every case turns on its own facts. What the defendant reasonably perceived, the immediacy of the threat, and the law of the jurisdiction, those are precisely the questions courts exist to answer, not internet comment sections. History also explains why many Black Americans view these cases through a different lens. That's why we talk about history. Because from the lynching of Emmett Till to the deaths of Trayvon Martin, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, Tamir Rice, Black communities have repeatedly witnessed encounters that ended in death. And it's usually followed by legal systems that many believe fail to deliver any justice. Whether one agrees with that perspective or not, it is part of the historical context that shapes public reaction today. That appeal is not about rewriting history. It is about making certain that the Constitution means what it says. The appellate court will examine the record, review the legal arguments, and determine whether errors affected the fairness of the proceedings. That process should be thorough, transparent, and guided by law, not politics, not race, and not public pressure. If the conviction was obtained through a fair trial, it should withstand the appellate review. If significant legal errors occurred, the courts have both the authority and the responsibility to correct them. That's not favoritism. There's no such thing as black privilege. That's the American justice system working as it was supposed to. The appeal has begun. Now let the law speak. Let justice prevail. This is the open eye. And turn the air conditioner on. It's cold in here. All right. Let's keep it moving. WHGE 95.3 FM. Suicide my ass. We know what they're trying to sell us, and we ain't buying it. A 27-year-old black woman, Tania Nicole Miller, leaves Michigan and comes to Miami for Juneteenth weekend. A time that's supposed to be about freedom, survival, and joy. And she ends up dead. Hanging from a tree in Gwen Cherry Park in Gladeville. The official line, apparent suicide. Case almost closed before the ink is dry, before the questions are even asked, before the family could even breathe. Black women don't hang themselves from trees in public parks on Juneteenth weekend. That's not just suspicious, that's historical trauma screaming in our face. Her family is not accepting that neat little narrative. And they shouldn't. They've ordered an independent autopsy. They're demanding a full forensic investigation. They're demanding the truth. Not a press release. And while they fight for answers, where are the major news outlets? Where's the wall-to-wall coverage they roll out for every missing white woman, every sensational crime that fits their rating script? One CBS Miami report, one. The rest of mainstream media has chosen silence. But the community has not. Social media is lit up with justice for Tania. Another hashtag. People are asking the questions the press won't. People are refusing. Absolutely refusing to accept the story that they're quietly trying to file away under suicide and pushing it to be forgotten. The investigation is still active. The medical examiner's final findings are still pending. Toxicology is still pending. In other words, this is not over. So why does the official tone sound like it already is? A young black woman found hanging from a tree during Juneteenth deserves more than a quick ruling and national silence. She deserves more than no foul play suspected and a shrug. Her family deserves more than condolences and a script about mental health slapped on top of a case that hasn't even been fully examined in the public eye. Let's be clear, we are not here to play detective on the airwaves. We are here to say that when black bodies show up dead in ways that echo lynching, this country has a moral obligation to slow down, dig deep, and tell the goddamn truth. Not rush to close the book, not hide behind technical language, not disappear the story because it makes America look in the mirror. Tania Nicole Miller has a daughter, a sister, a friend, a human being who came to celebrate freedom and ended up dead in a way that drags the ugliest part of our history right back in our face. You don't get to wave that away with a parent suicide and move on to the next headline. So here's the call. Say her name, Tania Nicole Miller. Share her story. Hashtag justice for Tania. And demand transparency, full forensic investigation, independent autopsy results, and every finding made public. And demand coverage. National media attention, not local footnotes. Because if we let this pass in silence, we are telling the system it could keep writing our deaths off as paperwork. Her name is Tania Nicole Miller. Share it, know it, stand with her family, and demand that this investigation be thorough, honest, and transparent. We owe her that. We owe ourselves that. Suicide my ass. Just open eye. WHGE 95.3 FM. In history, memory, it's important. And so let's go back. And then we're going to go back and we're going to come forward. All right. On June 23rd, 1903, Wilmington, Delaware, right here in Wilmington, the city that prides itself on being the first state, the corporate capital, the northern edge of the Mason-Dixon, revealed the truth that history books long tried to bury. Racial terror was not a Southern phenomenon. It was American. And on that night, Wilmington stood shoulder to shoulder with the worst of Jim Crow's brutality. What happened? I'm talking about the burning of George White, a 24-year-old black laborer. The burning of George White was not a crime of passion. It was a public ritual, a civic performance of white supremacy. Thousands gathered. Ministers encouraged it. Families brought children. Souvenirs were taken from the ashes. And no one, not one person, was ever held accountable. This was not a mob losing control. This was a community asserting control. And Delaware has always lived in a psychological borderland. Northern in industry, Southern in racial ideology. Wilmington in 1903 was a city that wanted the economic benefits of the North while maintaining the racial order of the South. The lynching of George White exposed that contradiction. It showed that the North's hands were not clean. It showed that racial terror did not require plantations or Confederate flags. It only required a society willing to suspend law when a black body was accused. Because understand something, racial terror is bipartisan. The accusation against White was never tested in court. He denied it. Evidence was thin. But in the racial logic of the era, accusation was conviction, and conviction was a death sentence carried out by the crowd. Oh, the mob stormed the Newcastle County workhouse, dragged him to Price's Corner, and burned him alive. The spectacle was the point. Lynching was not merely punishment, it was terrorism. It was designed to send a message to every black person in Delaware. The law will not protect you. The crowd will define your fate. After the flames died, Wilmington did what America often does. It forgot. Or rather, it chose to forget. For more than a century, the city lived with the memory, but not the acknowledgement. The site remained unmarked. Schools did not teach it. Newspapers softened it. Civic leaders avoided it. That silence is not accidental. It was part of the same machinery that made the lynching possible. The belief that black suffering is a footnote, not a headline. Yo. The lynching of George White is not an isolated event. It is part of a continuum that includes the 1968-69 National Guard occupation of Wilmington, redlining the destruction of black neighborhoods, the long shadow of segregation in schools and housing. The persistent erasure of black stories from Delaware's official narratives. When people say that was a long time ago, they ignore the fact that the institutions that failed George White are the ancestors of the institutions we navigate today. Only in 2019, 116 years later, did Delaware erect a historical marker acknowledging what happened. That delay is its own indictment. It shows how deeply America resists confronting its own violence. But the marker also represents something else, a refusal to let silence win. A refusal to let Wilmington pretend that its history is cleaner than it is. To remember George White is not to reopen old wounds, it is to acknowledge that the wound has never been treated. It's to say that justice delayed is not only justice denied, it is history distorted. And for Wilmington, a city that has lived through occupation, segregation, and the slow erosion of black neighborhoods, remembering George White is part of reclaiming the truth. Racial terror happened here. It shaped this city, and its legacy still echoes through the street. This week marks the 123 years since Wilmington watched the burning of George White. A black man dragged from Newcastle County workhouse by a white mob, tortured and burned alive, while thousands looked on. No trial, no evidence, no accountability. And here we are in 2026, still asking the same question. What does it mean to be black and simply trying to survive in Wilmington? Because today the phrase isn't lynch mob. It isn't the phrase lynched by a mob. Today, it's running while black. And that brings us to the death of 19-year-old Kadir Skinner. Police say they saw a crowd at 24th and Jessup. They say Kadir came out of a house with a gun pointed toward that crowd. Police say he ran. Police say an officer fired. They say they recovered a loaded firearm, but his family and witnesses tell a different story. They say Kadir was shot in the back. They say he may have been running because he was being chased maybe by a police dog or a pit bull or something. And they say the officers were picking up shell casings before anyone explained what happened. Witnesses say he was handcuffed and placed in a police vehicle instead of being rushed to the hospital. Is this policy? Because that's what his father asked. And they are demanding every second of body camera footage. Those are not small questions. Those are not wait and see questions. Those are life and death questions that deserve immediate, transparent answers. Because we know the pattern. We've seen the script. We live the aftermath. Every time a black person is shot by police, the public is fed the same phrases. He had a gun. He reached. He lunged. He ran. And this is before the investigation is complete, before the footage is released, before the family even buries their child, the justification arrives before the truth. And that's why transparency cannot be optional. If the shooting was justified, then release the evidence. Release the body camera footage. Release the dispatch audio. Release any surveillance video. Let the facts speak for themselves. If the officer acted within policy, transparency should strengthen public trust. If he wasn't, transparency is the only path to accountability. Because here's the reality. Black communities across America have watched too many of these cases end in silence, delay, or denial. Too many families have been told, wait for the process, while the process protects everyone except the victim. And in Wilmington, that distrust is not new. It's not imagined. It's not exaggerated. It's rooted in a history that includes the burning of George White in 1903, the National Guard occupation in 1968, and decades of over-policing, under-protection, and unanswered deaths. When Kadir's mother learned her son had been shot, she was at work. At the hospital, when the trauma call came in. Can you even imagine that? You're doing your job and suddenly the patient fighting for his life is your own child. His father said it plainly. My son is gone. The officer that shot my son got to go home. No parent should have to live with that pain without clear, complete answers. This commentary is not a declaration of guilt or innocence. It's a declaration of urgency. It's a demand for truth, because justice requires evidence, accountability requires transparency, and public trust requires both. Until every relevant piece of evidence is released and independently examined, the questions surrounding the death of Kadir Skinner will remain unanswered. And unanswered questions are not justice. This is The Open Eye. I'm Patrice Gibbs. All right. WHGE 95.3 FM. As we prepare to leave one another for another week, remember something that history has taught us over and over again. Empires do not fall because people suddenly discover the truth. Empires begin to fall when enough ordinary people refuse to keep believing that lie. Every generation faces a decision. Will we inherit the world exactly as it was handed to us? Or will we leave it stronger, wiser, and freer for those who come after? Knowledge without action is entertainment. But knowledge joined with disciplined action has changed the course of human history countless times. Read more, question more. Support institutions that serve your community. Teach your children who they are before the world tells them who they are supposed to be. Build businesses. Support one another, protect one another, and never surrender your ability to think independently. Remember, no government can imprison an awakened mind. No corporation can market truth out of existence. And no amount of propaganda can permanently erase a people who refuse to forget who they are. So thanks for spending this time with me. And as always, I hope you learned something today, because I learned something before I got here. All right? And as we always tell you, destiny determines who enters your life, but you decide who stays. Therefore, value those who value you, and don't treat those as a priority who treat you as an option. This is Open Eye, WHGE 95.3 FM. I'm Patrice Gibbs. Thanks for joining us. Peace. All right. I'm out. That's word. Oh, I'm still on it. Global Africa supremacy. Because the world was a much better place when the African ruled. All right. Peace.